Hello, adventurers, and welcome to another of the Zulu's RPG stream. How are y'all doing? Alex, Jason, how are you guys doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm having a great day.
Yeah, I'm doing all right. I'm just hanging out, playing some D&D, and getting ready to talk about RPGs.
Perfect. So for those of you who don't know, and I don't know how you wouldn't, but in case you don't, we are the Dungeon Masters at Zulu's Board Game Cafe. Did you know that Zulu's Board Game Cafe actually offers hosted Dungeons and Dragons and other RPG services? Alex, I believe you have a prop for us?
Yeah, so if you, I'm gonna switch cameras real quick. So if you purchase any sort of book, any D&D book from Zulu's Board Game Cafe, we will be including a very long listed bookmark that's got all of our information, so you can be able to see. We do host one-shot events. We also host plenty of games for kids ages 8 to 17, and we also run games for adults weekly. And if you want to just play a one-shot and you need a DM, just hire us. We're there. And there's also a fun side as well, where we've got a quick little tip for you and a couple of cool pictures.
Actually, that picture of the guy fighting the dragon, probably one of my kind of favorite D&D pictures. Very very quintessential. In my
that
mind.
is middle school for me.
That was the one on the red box, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Not red or blue. Well, it was red. Blue had the green dragon.
Green Dragon. Not sure I'm familiar with that one. Actually, so it's funny that we mentioned dragons. So Dungeons and Dragons very much is a fantasy game, often sat very squarely in a high fantasy setting. In previous editions, there were a variety of different sort of settings that would come out. Actually, now that I think of it, what setting was third edition in? Because I remember there was a setting
Third
that
edition
was
Dragonlance, I do believe.
Was it really?
No, third edition. No, third. I'm thinking fourth. Sorry. Fourth had, or was it fourth? When they.
Wait, hold on. We're talking about Dragonlance? I think that was second edition.
No, well, it existed at the time. What I'm trying to, so I'm equating it with, so there were several books that came out, guides to dragons, guides to monsters, that that were, I believe, coincided with fourth edition, and they were all pretty much, it was all told in Dragonlance. That was the default. In fact, the main character writing the books was a Kender.
Oh, that's right.
like the egg.
Like grab that because I actually, now that I'm referring to it.
Oh, interesting. Greyhawk.
So
the default setting for third edition was Greyhawk.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
We lost Jason.
Oh no.
These are the books I was talking about.
Oh yeah.
These things.
See, and I felt like Greyhawk would make sense because that was the original setting that it was set in, right?
Yes.
That was the Gygax setting.
But I think they were realizing that Dragonlance kind of resonates a little bit more with kids. Although,
that's true.
Once the weird thing is it does feel more like Greyhawk because they don't include like draconians and weird things that are from Dragonlance in these books. So
interesting.
So
fifth edition. Oh, sorry.
I think in the practical guide to writing dragons or dragon writing, there is like little blurbs of other types of dragons, and I think that they might actually go into draconians a little bit. They don't go into dragonborn, but they go into dragon people.
Yeah, I think they refer to half dragons actually.
That's what it's called actually. There you go. I don't have the book in front of me, but
we're getting the weeds.
We are in the weeds. So, so third edition, the setting was Dragonlance. Fifth edition, the setting, Greyhawk. Fifth edition, the setting is the Forgotten Realms, specifically kind of sort of the Sword Coast. And both of those settings are very much what I would call a sort of high fantasy setting. However, as there have been more books that have come out and just more RPGs in general, there are a plethora of different settings, different fantasy genres, even like subsects of fantasy. I would say probably the as a simple way of sort of describing this, for pop culture reference, the world of Game of Thrones is a fantasy setting. The world of Lord of the Rings are fantasy settings. D&D is a fantasy setting. All three of them, though, wildly different in their sort of feel and style. So as a dungeon master, one of the things you can do is try to sort of evoke the feeling of those different settings by slightly changing how you approach a sort of given thing. Alex, I think you were trying to say something.
Yeah, so I know that. So I've just recently finished watching the Game of Thrones, just binge watching the entire season, or not season, the entire series. There's a lot, and so like popping up all over my like YouTube page is just a whole bunch of like Game of Thrones world building stuff, like all of the stuff that's like behind the scenes of like the main storyline. So it's always fun to just start looking into the whole gigantic world. And
you mean the Song of Fire and Ice?
Yeah,
Ice
the
and
Song
Fire.
of Ice and Fire.
Ice and Fire.
Ice and Fire.
Kind of backwards. Another thing we should point out too is you were brought up Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and you brought up also high fantasy, which as a concept is an interesting one. So you brought it up, but I kind of wanted to define it really quick.
Yes.
It tends to be a world that has lots of available magic, especially like in D&D. There's magic items, there's tons of magical creatures, innate magic, wizards and sorcerers and all that stuff. That's all out there. In fact, in D&D 5th edition is so high magic that most classes can get spells, or at least things that are very much might as well be spells in the case of like monks.
Essentially, every other person is going to have wield magic in their sort of magic in their lifetime. Sorry, every other hero is going to wield magic at some sort of point.
Yeah.
Whereas Gandalf, as far as I could tell, knows a spell. He knows light. And Sting, this magical, mystical, amazing blade, glows in the dark. I love that so much of Lord of the Rings seems to be light-based in its particular magics.
It tells you when orcs are near.
Was it orcs? Yeah, it was orcs, wasn't it?
Yes.
Wait, how did it let him see the oh no, it was the other MacGuffin that glowed that let him see the invisible spider.
Yeah.
There we go.
Anyways, so yeah, and one of the things about Lord of the Rings, looking at its magic, it's very like there's not a ton floating around. There's even the elves, you don't see them like casting spells to do all their stuff. They're definitely a magical creature, and that's kind of why they're leaving, because it's kind of the end of that era. And I think that's part of the reason there's so little magic. Even when you like look at like the Uruk-hai, the advanced orcs, they almost that's the biggest magic that you see, other than like maybe the Ents.
Oh, like magical creatures.
Yeah. And
okay.
How Saruman brings them about.
Gotcha.
Kind of like dark magic has a bigger sway. The most powerful magic item is horribly cursed.
Yeah. So that was the other thing. I've never been entirely sure. Okay, so we're gonna a slight diversion. So there's the rings of power, yeah.
Yep.
And obviously the one ring that binds them all. So what did the original rings do? I knew that they eventually became ring wraiths. And is that what the one ring did, was turn the bearers into ring wraiths, or did the rings do something else?
It more made them like masters, like they were the leaders. And so, but under the bidding of the lidless eye. So
does that mean that he then could mind control them?
I kind of think like they just couldn't. They became his forever and ever, but they had absolute power while alive. So that kind of thing of like where they get back up.
Oh, okay. So they're unkillable while they're wait.
Yeah, unkillable because like obviously.
Yeah, I guess what exactly the rings do has always been very vague, and was not really described.
Yeah, it's been years
since
I've read the books, and so I'm and honestly, I've seen the movie way more times than I've read the books. So I'm not a Lord of the Rings expert. I just pretend to be one. But no, I believe that it was just a marking of power. I don't know if it exactly what the magic was. I forget, but So
I didn't actually watch it, but I think that there's a popular video that's going around of a literal Lord of the Rings expert that's like explaining parts of Lord of the Rings that I need to just jump in and watch.
Okay. I'll have to give it a go.
Man, I'll see if I can find it real quick.
So going back to the difference between, say, high fantasy versus other versions of fantasy, magic in 5th edition is very, very easy to wield. your ability to change your spells and to have your spells and have spells that are useful for things. Getting cantrips is very easy to do in 5th edition. It's something that sort of is very pervasive in the world. But what's very fascinating, I think, and what you kind of have to think of when dealing with genres is how does the different things in the world change how the world exists as compared to, say, our world. So, for instance, we have technology that allows us to do things like fly or move very fast, or breathe fire or whatever. Whereas magic is sort of the replacement of that technology in a lot of these sort of fantasy realms, and that sort of high fantasy realm. Whereas a sort of low fantasy is going to be more the things where, fighting to find food and just survive in general are sort of high up on the priority lists, because you don't have things like technology or magic to sort of step in and take care of that. And one of the things I find very, very fascinating in sort of different genres is the sort of progression of things. So a lot of times fantasy is set in, what would that be? Like 1000 AD sort of range?
It varies a lot.
Vaguely, yeah. And a lot of times... Yeah, it's that vaguely European, vaguely turn of the century sort of thing. What's very interesting is when an author or a creator of one of these genres plays around with the idea of the sort of natural progression of magic replacing technology. My favorite example of that is the sort of progression that you get in Eberron. You've got a setting where they have harnessed the use of magic and elementals and all that things to be able to have trains, to have airplanes, and to create an entire race of mechanical people. So it's
robots.
Yeah, Warforged are a very interesting and a very interesting race to have as an option for all that fun stuff. Also, I've been spending a lot of time in the Mournlands, so that's more what I've been dealing with in Eberron. But Eberron is such a rich place with a lot of very interesting stuff that is very different in the sort of style and feel than Forgotten Realms.
And it's released by Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
Or there was a book that was released by Wizards of the Coast.
This one.
With a whole bunch of cool, fun magic.
Yeah, I figured we'd start with the genres of books that have been recently released, and then we sort of branch off into the mad world that goes out from there. So I think sort of the hallmarks of the difference between sort of your high fantasy versus your sort of industrial fantasy, I guess you could call it. There's probably a better term for it, but I like industrial fantasy.
You can even call some things like low fantasy too, or like so there's like even low fantasy settings where it's like
Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones. Yeah.
Or even some settings that are, like you said, that industrial settings can be low magic, but like have that technology utilizing lower levels of magic.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's kind of interesting is one of the things that they bring up in Eberron is that there are these, not only magic tech, but essentially there's this thing where essentially anyone can learn the basics of magic, and it sort of is represented kind of like in the real world version of people, what you call them, like apprentices, electricians or other mechanics or that sort of thing, where it's just like, we use magic to make things that people use every day. And a similar one actually to that is the delightful world of Ravnica. It's another world that very much is like, so we've got this magical technology. What happens if we continued industrializing using that magical technology? And it's just a delightful sort of progression of the concept. It's almost out of fantasy at that point.
Well, and I also like the whole idea that Ravnica... Well, so Ravnica is like a whole special magic plane where it's like split up into 10 different guilds of different magic color combinations. And each guild is very, very different. Like there are some that are like more technologically advanced and want to progress, like Simic and Izzet, which are both like blue-based guilds and whatnot. Just like the whole, we're the smart people, we want to improve society. And then you've got like the Gruul on the other side where they are red and green, where they just want to cause pure chaos. And they're like, cities? Nah, burn them to the ground.
Which is ironic because they live in a world that is literally all city.
Yeah, so they're just going to burn it to the ground. They're just
the whole world.
all
So
the time.
fun tidbit. I was actually reading a bit in the original thing. So each of the guilds did originally have tasks that they were supposed to do. When originally creating the guilds and all that stuff and the guild pact, it was so that they could create a better, stronger society. Actually, Waterdeep also is rife with guilds. So the three main powers of Waterdeep are, of course, the guilds, the nobility, and the lord. What's the council called? The Open Lords? No, it's one Open Lord and the Masked Lords. I don't remember what it's called, but the lords, the aristocrats, and the guilds are sort of the power base in Waterdeep, and that's kind of taken it to its natural extreme in Ravnica, where they've sort of extrapolated out that idea of that.
Yeah, and there was it. I could go way down into the rabbit hole, but like there was supposed to be like a dude that was supposed to be like, yeah, no, I'm making sure that all the guilds have signed their pact and are like.
I
No,
think
you're
that was actually a thing that kind of happened on accident. You're talking about what's his name, right?
Jace becoming the living guild.
Yeah, so the Guild Pact was originally just a big magical contract, and then Jace became it accidentally or something. I don't know. It gets weird. He wasn't supposed to. If I've learned anything about Jace, it's that he just causes trouble wherever he goes. He is trouble.
I wish that guy could just like he could just sit on the bench for a little bit. I think he's sitting on the bench now, just not causing chaos. But who's to say?
Who's to say?
He's probably somewhere just stirring it all up. Oh, maybe he'll be in the Forgotten Realms in a couple of months.
Oh yeah, the magic the D&D magic set, magic D&D set. I don't know.
Magical D&D set crossover.
Speaking of more magic D&D settings and sort of fantasy genres, I'm really excited for. They have announced was it Strixhaven, the Curriculum of Chaos, I believe it's what it's called. It's going to be yet another setting and genre that is very sort of academically based, which I'm very, very excited for.
Now, for that one, I do hope that they try and stay away from like just being like Harry Potter, but D&D.
I mean, I
anyway,
I know nothing about the set, so
we're losing Jason. We're talking too much magic. We got to talk about fantasy again.
I was actually going to point something out about like we were talking about like low fantasy settings, and like there's and in terms of like we brought up Lord of the Rings, and there are role playing games that encompass those. There's the One Ring. There was Middle Earth role playing back in the day.
There's a 5th edition source book for I don't remember which. It's a third party 5th edition Middle Earth source book that I think we had for a while.
We did. I believe we put them on clearance, but and they've since found new homes. But like, but there are other systems. Obviously, that's kind of my thing, is knowing a bunch of them. But I was also older settings. Obviously, most of them are coming back to 5th edition. Ravenloft was one of them, and that's horror. One of the things that I was thinking about with like the different genres that they brought in and all the different sets kind of introduced new worlds, because they're like kind of like playing with, or even new expansion bits for places in the existing worlds like Greyhawk and stuff. They added I don't have the books personally, but they did basically a South American where very dinosaur. There was new saurian creatures that you could play.
Are you talking about the Tomb of Annihilation?
No, I'm talking about, it was a specific, in 2nd edition they had a
gotcha,
specific setting. I don't want to say it's Maztica. Anyways, and that I mean there was a bunch of versions of that, but it introduced new magic systems and new races and all that. That's their standard bread and butter. But like 5th edition also, you've got, like I said, Eberron, we've got Ravnica, we've got Ravenloft, Theros.
I love Theros. Such a fun setting.
Yeah. The one thing, like, I'm trying to remember one of the other ones. I probably have it right here.
Wildmount? The Wayfarer's Guide to Wildmount?
Kind of, sort of, yeah. I mean, Acquisitions Inc. Here you go. Rick and Morty, even.
That's right.
Yeah, not as much a fantasy genre, but yeah.
I flipped through it a bit. I haven't read it completely, but it's obviously a takeoff on everything. But
there's a whole episode of Rick and Morty where they are literally just doing D&D.
That's pretty much what the game is. But for a while, like there was a lot of expansions, and like you brought up low fantasy, and my favorite one that there's rumors that it may be on the horizon. They've been saying like they're going to bring a couple back. Is Dark Sun. Dark Sun takes place on a world known as Athos. It's a Mad Max D&D. So effectively, their magic has completely changed. So there's a form of magic called defiling, and that magic drains the life from it's more powerful, but it drains the life force of the plants and animals around them, creating like dust storms and stuff. The entire planet is a desert. It is there's just small city states run by god emperors who the only clerics get their power directly from the last of the wizards. And they're kind of enforcing inquisitors. It is dark, and it is strange. The only halflings are cannibals. They're strange little cannibal creatures that live. There are druids, but they only worship the elements. There is no more nature per se. Yeah. It is an interesting setting, but you can play as a defiler, and there are wizards called like arcane characters that are preservers that can basically get around it, but everybody hates them. If you show you have magic, they try and kill you. And it's such an interesting and different setting. There's no metal. All the metal has been completely destroyed. So everything is like stone weapons and bone and like obsidian. It is an interesting, there's no horses. You ride like bugs. I mean, it is out there. Like there's strange vehicles and things there's a giant sea that's just made of silt, and you'll sink into it. There's no water. It's all about survival. But one of the things they had to do was by taking the magic out, they had to really get rid of spells like Goodberry and stuff, because you can so easily work around like, oh, I need water.
I got Goodberry.
Yeah, so that was a big one I remember in second edition. Is any of their expansion things would completely go, all right, in this world, this spell does not work. In Ravenloft second edition, none of the detect evil or reading people's minds could work. They just failed because there was no divination that could let you know a person's motivations.
Yeah,
because would ruin the mystery. And it was such an or you couldn't summon things from other planes and stuff, so all the conjuration spells were just garbage. You really couldn't do anything. And I remember that distinctly. It's not something they do in 5th edition because it's you kind of have to work with it. I don't know how I'm still reading through Ravenloft, but I don't think they touch on that in Ravenloft if they do a different take.
So one of the things that they mentioned in Ravenloft was that magic operates slightly differently. So for instance, if you did a mage hand, instead of creating a normal mage hand, it would instead be like a skeletal hand. If you were to use your summon steed from a paladin, you would get a skeletal horse. So it was much more of like they were like hey, DMs, reskin it to make it seem more spooky.
Yeah.
It still functions, but, spooky.
Second edition with a difficult way of listing every spell and then saying how it looked different. Yeah. So that was a nightmare. I remember because they had that, like, what the steed would become, like a zombie or skeletal horse. Yeah. I mean,
at the same time, though, like, I tip my hat to them for the sheer sort of the chutzpah to be able to put that level of sort of work into it.
It's such a big chunk of the book, too. It's like, I think like 10 full pages with like just sentence descriptions for each spell.
Like, we didn't need all of that.
Yeah.
But again, the commitment was the nice part. Actually, going back to genres, there's actually a good chunk of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft that is just these are the genres. This is how to play the genres, and actually, and it does actually a really good job talking about like these are the sort of adventures that you would have in this. These are the sort of monsters you deal with. These are the MacGuffins. These are the places. And it does a really good job being like, hey, this is how you evoke this sort of feel for this type of game. I feel like a lot of times we do tend to focus on the dungeon masters, and I know the majority of the people that watch are not dungeon masters, so I feel it'd be remiss for us not to talk a little bit about how a player interacts with these different settings. Going back to like your Eberrons, going back to your fantasies, and as is sort of always the case, it's your session zero. I don't know how many times I've been like, hey, D&D is a thing, let's play it, and someone's like, I want to be a gunslinger. And it's like, in Forgotten Realms, that doesn't make sense. Unless you're a drow. There's very specific circumstances. But if you want to be a gunslinger, play Eberron. Eberron's all about it. Play Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. Like, having firearms in those games is very normal. It's not anachronistic in the way that so often, your Greyhawks and your Forgotten Realms, no, don't. What are you doing? Get out of here. Play. What you call it? The Dark Sun. Like, there's so many genres where guns are fun, interesting. Like, even honestly, a lot of like the horror settings, you've got that flintlock, and you've got that one opportunity. Like, this silver bullet is literally the only thing that can stop this guy. Sure hope I don't miss.
Right.
And that makes interesting moments. That makes fun stuff. But if you're just like, I like to play with guns sometimes. Make sure your genre fits the things that you have.
And you'd be like, oh wait, so can you switch over to a bow? It actually fits with the setting so much better.
Crossbow expert. I'm sorry.
No, and crossbow expert's fine. Do a crossbow expert.
It's closest to like a gunslinger.
Yeah.
Wield two.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Cool.
So we were talking about like that whole get the players and what you're interested in, and like there's a constant like choosing the world you're going to play D&D in is a huge part. I mean, the biggest thing is going to be what is the DM comfortable with, and you try and make sure the players are all on board, and you can kind of in every world though, even like Eberron and some of these more like you say there's always areas of the world you can come from where you can be the raging barbarian, of course, and who doesn't care about technology.
Halflings. For some strange reason, halflings seem to be the butt of the sort of like, this is a little different and weird thing. Because you mentioned the cannibal halflings, and I was immediately thinking of Eberron, the dinosaur riding halflings, and I was like, what's it with the halflings? just like other the weird ones. I don't know.
Yeah. They're 3 feet tall and pure forms of chaos. They just want to see the world burn because they can't reach the rest of it. That's a fun little short joke. Anyway, so well, what if like I know one of my favorite. It's kind of a fantasy setting, but it's just the Avatar universe. You can easily build like a firebender or waterbender. You can easily build the Avatar in the Dungeons and Dragons world, but it's what if you can have a whole setting of like benders and whatnot.
Yeah. No, I mean, pretty much any like fantasy world can be kind of semi-replicated. I mean, obviously, the way spells work in D&D is not going to completely coincide with a lot of. You're trying to do Lord of the Rings, you can kind of take the ideas, but you're not going to be able to replicate Lord of the Rings if players have access to all the normal character classes.
Yeah.
There's not really warlocks and sorcerers running around. Or even barbarians, really. I'm sure I wouldn't be completely out of place, but like the crazier barbarians, like the shape-shifting ones from Tasha's and stuff like that.
Or the wild magic barbarians.
Yeah, a little bit out of place. Yeah. And that's another one to talk about with that Session Zero thing. Is like there's a lot of the subclasses, especially in expanded books, that don't really fit a lot of worlds. I mean, obviously D&D, I think the biggest thing you can say about like making characters, especially in 5th edition, is they are the biggest group of goofballs. Every player group is just kind of this hodgepodge ragtag mess because everybody's like, I'm going to play this, I mean, sometimes you end up with a weird group that ends up being completely copacetic and they work
cohesive,
as a normal. Yeah, they just gel, and they just like we're all humans and we're all fighters, because that's what we wanted to do. It's like so you're kind of a normal group per se, and we have the one wizard and a cleric that helps us and heals us. There we go. But for the most part anymore, you've got your gnome paladin that's gonna, I have
a group that is an Eladrin, sorry, I gotta think of this one. A Ladrin, a Kobold, a Tiefling, a Half-Orc, I think a Halfling, or a Half-Elf. There's one more in there as well. But, like, none of them are the kind of conventional races. And so it's one of those ones where it's like really stand out. Like you can be like, all right, so I'm looking for a group that has a tiefling, a kobold, and an eladrin. They're like they're those guys right there. Whereas like if you were in a group of all humans, like you could slip under the radar potentially. But like if you're this sort of hodgepodge group of sort of strange looking individuals, you get a lot of people that are like,
Hey,
look at those guys. But at the same time, like that kind of in that high fantasy world is much more sort of like, yeah, you got these groups of freaks that are hanging out together, because they're not necessarily freaks, they're a group of people that hang out together, like, sure, whatever. Whereas, yeah, like if you're in like your Lord of the Rings setting, and you've got an orc, a halfling, and a tiefling hanging out together, like that's super duper weird. Like that's super weird. So I don't think there's a Lord of the Rings equivalent of a tiefling, now that I think of it.
No.
The demons aren't really conventional in there.
Yeah, one of the things to point out, like when you're doing that, like session 0 or whatever, is as the DM, like you may want to run Lord of the Rings, but if you're running the 5th edition system, your players aren't going to appreciate the fact they only get to play a human, elf, or dwarf. Or
halfling. You could play a burglar.
You could play Middle Earth. They'll be way better with it, especially if you're using, like you said, that third-party thing where you can really kind of more flesh it out closer to the Tolkien universe. Yeah. That can be tricky. I was actually thinking, I have a weird thing where my adult groups that I've run, that I'm currently running, are kind of set in the same universe. It's a very human-centric universe, and I didn't even purposely do it, but all of my groups are now predominantly human that I run with adults. Like there's only a couple of non-humans in the groups currently. Like one group of 5 has 1 human, and the other group of 3 currently has an eladrin. But I also point out that I try and like be a little more like the world is human centric, so they kind of look down, especially on anything that isn't the standard races from the books.
Yeah.
So those are seen as weirdos, and they will notice you, and they will keep track of you. When that Eric Hokra comes in, everybody's like, yeah, what the hell is that, and what is it doing? Yep. It's a pretty bird, but is it a meal or is it? Looks like a big turkey. Yeah. Early this year.
It came early, yes.
Oh, boy.
Trying to think of the weirdest group or the strangest combination of characters I've got in one group. I know for the longest time I've had a green dragonborn, a warforged. Which I have a fun story about just his personality, and like the character's personality. So there's a green dragonborn, a warforged, and then right now they've got a drow hanging out with them. And every once in a while, they'll have like a gnome or a wizard, or a gnome, a Kalishtar from Eberron, and like we're still playing in a high fantasy setting that's that has aspects of Forgotten Realms. So I'm just like, yeah, you guys are the only ones who look like yourselves. Yeah, you're the Warforged. People don't know who you are. So the thing about the Warforged is, if they're running into someone who's kind of a jerk, they'll call him a robot, and he's like, "What'd you just say to me? What'd you just say? Call me a what now?"
Yeah, totally.
So it's always fun to mess with the kid, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna pull out my sword and stab him." Yeah.
Earthquake. All right.
Cool.
Oh, I just bumped a bunch of stuff in.
Jason, if I remember correctly, you have a whole bunch of things hiding in the wings for us that are sort of fantasy genre adjacent, no, they're just fantasy genres.
Fantasy genre. So I do have, I was going to bring up this book, which is a 2nd edition book. I mean, ignore the title, but it is it's hugely important to D&D. Actually, this is actually the hidden beauty of this book is the fact that it introduced the concept of non-weapon proficiencies. So really? As we all know, yeah, D&D was always so to have like stealth and stuff. You just would, like only rogues could sneak. They were the only ones that had. Time. So this introduced non-weapon proficiencies, so you can now be a basket weaver. But it was set in the land of Karatur, which was, I believe, I want to say it's of course it doesn't say. It's part of I want to say Greyhawk. But I could be misremembering. And include like new character classes, a bunch of spells. Magic worked differently there. Like there was like the culture bred different types of wizards and the like. So like the wizards were called Wujen, and you had to take all these oaths. Like you could never cut your fingernails or something, and that if you did, you would lose your powers for a time. That kind of thing, or cut your hair, or whatever type of abstain from alcohol, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it had rules for ninjas, so you cannot beat that. Plus, I mean, as a kid, this was, this of course is the book I had from when I was a kid. It was always exciting to see all of the stuff in the ninja weapons and so on. But it had a whole culture built in. And I mean, now this, it could be seen as co-opting a culture. And so it's something to be aware of. But it was, like I said, the idea of looking at places and seeing having different types of people in the world, even just as immigrants or so on, makes it, and having their world be quite a bit different. Suddenly, where are those weapons? Oh, there we go. There's the page I remember as a kid. Ooh. And speaking of that, another weird one. This one, Al Qadim.
Oh.
This is Adventures Guide to Zakara, but it was the Land of Fate, in which this is the Middle East, or Arabia, specifically, kind of the classic 1001 Arabian Nights.
You mentioned fate. Was that like a? How do you mean by the Land of Fate?
So it was all about. Basically, that's just the subtitle. But the Land of Fate, it consisted of, that was kind of the nickname for the land, because it was just the it's been a while since I've read it, so I'm trying to remember. But it's I just remember the feel of it. Like magic was also different here. Yeah. And there was a lot more magic items as opposed to there's of course all the gin and Madrid and all that stuff. But it was mainly the flying carpets and ways of binding gin into service and things like that. It's a very different setting. I remember enjoying it. I never played it, honestly. It was always when I adapted things to other D&D things. I still do, because of course it's in my head, and I do like having a bigger world. And so having people from an area like this or from this area is kind of fascinating. I don't remember. I believe this was also a Greyhawk expansion.
Now you mentioned a couple times that magic works differently. Now, by that, do you mean and I know obviously in previous editions, the way you prepared spells and that sort of thing was slightly different, but was there even more of a difference in the?
So they would have different versions of the classes for the most part, kind of kits. It was second edition, had these specific things, and so it would have ways that spells would work. It would have literally how the spells were different or which spells you couldn't get. So there was a lot more limitations. Second edition was all about limited characters. So there was limits of what level you could get in this class, and then especially if you were non-human, humans were the only ones that could get to 20, and I think humans and half elves were the only ones who level 20. Everything else, or unlimited technically, and everything else had a cutoff of 12 or 8, depending on what the stereotypes were. It's dwarves couldn't be wizards, but they could be up to 8 or up to 9th level clerics.
Interesting.
Yeah, but they could split class, and humans couldn't. Yeah, blah blah blah. But one of the big things was, like I said, with Ravenloft and all that, was they would just flat out go in this area. There's some kind of magic that stops this from functioning, or that kind of thing. That would cause certain spells to be more effective or less effective. A lot of times it was to keep genre. Like I said, to adapt the second edition or any D&D edition to a specific world. Like I said, Goodberry kills that dark sun, but it also kills anything in the desert or even a survival campaign. If you want to dump your characters off in the middle of nowhere, and like the whole thing is to survive to get back to civilization. That's almost impossible to do in 5th edition because there's the Outlander background that gives you food.
Yep.
There's Rangers and Druids, and then on top of that, there's like create food and water for clerics, so on, so forth.
I thought though with Outlander, there had to have the option of food being there. I guess though, then it comes back to that idea though of the genre. Like in the same way that I don't like worrying about the number of arrows that my players have, it's because the genre to me makes more sense to be like it's those big epic fights in that sort of high fantasy world, whereas like again that low fantasy world where you're fighting to survive, like then it's when it's more interesting. Like I think the things that you're choosing to focus on, I think in many ways your genre will affect what things you care about. I think, and that also means that you do need, you're right, because like Goodberry and a lot of other things makes it so that some of the genres just don't work, but I think that 5th edition is nice in that it's more of, if you want to play any genre in any setting, you can. And I think just like as a player and as a DM, having that gentleman's agreeing and that session 0 of like, all right, so we're playing survival, which means that if you want to make arrows, you have to have proficiency in carpenter's tools. Otherwise, no arrows. Probably should get some sticks to throw at people. Also, no Goodberry. That's not a spell you can have. Sorry. No Outlanders. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other option. Oh, sorry, Alex.
Oh, I also know for like heavy dungeon delving, or if you're just doing like a one-off, like heavy dungeon delving, it's like while the spell knock is very helpful, it's just sometimes like, can you not make a wizard that knows the spell knock and please solve the puzzle?
Depends on how quick. Yeah, I mean, you can work around that if you know full well that knock is going to screw it up. There are, you just put a number of locked doors, and they can waste all their spell slots on those locked doors.
Also, it makes a sound that lets people know that they're there for I think 300 feet in every direction. Like by casting knock, you've just pulled everything within 300 feet. And I think that's the thing as a DM is you have to just remember, like, all right, so they've cast knock, so that means that this room, everyone is now moving here. This room is moving to that room, which then moves over to there. This room starts going over here, and you're like, I have to run like 37 NPCs all attacking all at once. And as we all know, action management is the thing that's the most dangerous. As soon as you start getting more actions than your players, then they start sweating.
Yeah.
It starts panic.
And the thing I was going to point out is one of the things that I'm obviously, I like a lot of role-playing games. So the option to me is like, if I was going to do a survival game, 5th edition isn't the one I would go to. Like I said, that Middle Earth role-playing was incredibly granular. And like for a certain type, if you want to do like a survival thing, there's a number of systems that would be a better fit if you wanted to do like, we're going to do kind of a crafting survive in the wilderness campaign. Maybe you want to be playing like it's a zombie apocalypse, but it's fantasy. I
feel like there's a couple ones for that. Like I feel like there's survival settings.
Yeah, there's a bunch of them, honestly.
The apocalypse setting, is that one?
Dark Sun?
No. There's not setting. System.
The apocalypse. The all flesh must be eaten, and is that what you're thinking of?
Oh god.
So yeah, once again, I have way too many.
No, because I think it's just like Powered by the Apocalypse, I think is the name of.
Oh, okay, yes.
Or like Powered by Apocalypse.
Yeah.
There is a genre that is like a system that was then used for a bunch of other things, and I think actually, Jason, you're bringing up a great point where. So the setting is as much important as it is the system, because the system and the setting in a lot of ways inform each other. What in the same way that like what you choose to focus on, what things you have on the character sheet will greatly change what things characters are good at, can do. The West End Star Wars game, the 6 basic stats include mechanical and technical. It's, if I remember correctly, dexterity, strength, perception, knowledge, mechanical, technical. Like, mechanical and technical are 2 of the skills. That means that you live in a world where that's such an important part of everything that you need to have, like, your mechanical and technical knowledge are a fundamental, like, part of you as a person, whereas in like 5th edition, your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, that is who you are as a person. You know, the mechanics in so many ways inform the genre.
Yeah. No. Speaking of like a weird fantasy setting, I forgot about this one, but it's one of my favorites. A setting called Deadlands.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the Wild West with magic,
Yep.
and horror, because there's an underlying horror aspect to the game. But it, like that one is so thematic. Like you use poker, like the only kind of the basic wizards, quote unquote wizards, are called hucksters, and they figured out how Hoyle's Book of Games is really a manual to magic, and so they have to play a quick game of cards with a demon in order to get the access to their spells. So you actually roll and you play cards to cast your spells, and the better your hand, the better the spell. I always loved that kind of that thematicness to it, and you use poker chips to like get luck, and you know, and you kind of reach into a bag to pull a random color out when you do get more. You know, it's like a tiered inspiration. So, and yeah, as you did big deeds, they'll put even better poker chips into the bag.
Yeah.
But that's a great example of like that kind of it's also strangely kind of a low magic setting, because very few people have it. Everybody has access to like steampunk devices, because although people don't think it's magic, but it is in the world. But yeah,
still a magical world. Oh, there was one. So it was a YouTube series that I watched where they were called. It was called Grave Titan, I think, where they had a mix. So Will Wheaton was the game master. It was on the YouTube channel Geek and Sundry, and it was out a few years ago. But I was like, I super love the world, where it was a mix of technology, sort of, but also very magical. I think it was Grave Titan.
So, Jason, you brought up a delightful point. We're going to loop this back around to D&D and different fantasy genres. I think I very much love the option to have sort of open-ended sort of player choice. I think having that ability to really sort of just dive in and do whatever you want is, I think, something that makes pen and paper RPGs so much better than so many other sort of games. However, I don't know if you disagree or agree with me, guys, but I think restricting character creation, options for rules, and putting certain sort of limitations on the game can really make D&D feel like different genres. Ultimately, I think it still exists within the fantasy genre, but like, Alex, you've been playing a lot of or watching a lot of Game of Thrones recently. I'm sure there are things you could think of within the D&D setting where you're like, all right, these are the restrictions that I would put on the game to make it feel more like Game of Thrones. I think that'd be a really fascinating thing to kind of dive into is like what tweaks you would make to make it feel...
To emulate a genre.
Yeah.
Or a setting.
I know. Even for like a one shot that I ran a pretty long time ago at this point, I had already like picked out some pre-generated characters, but they were all different types of fighters with different fighting styles, and that it gave a very different feel compared to their regular characters. It was just like a one-off to add on to their story, but where they got to play the bad guys, but the bad guys were like melee, like they were fighters, they were not magical, whereas their regular characters were magic.
Well, and then also, so you bring up a delightful point with that. Imagine a game where the only way that you can just tell your players, I'm sorry, you cannot have healing magic. Oh, yeah. That would so fundamentally change how the game feels. The one we've talked about before, the one that I'm tempted by, but I'm not sure that I myself could deal with it. Would be like the long rest is a week of resting, and a short rest is 8 hours of resting. Like that one change, and you've suddenly completely changed the feel of the game.
There's a lot of stuff, those alternate rules in the DMG that completely change
Yeah.
the feel of the game. I love a lot of them. I've always been tempted to use a couple of them, like they have the extra stats, like honor
Yeah.
and sanity. I've always wanted to play around with them, but those ones I haven't really done just because I always think of it after character creation. Like, damn, I missed it.
Well, and also, I feel like as a veteran player, a lot more likely and interested in playing things that put restrictions on you. Whereas if you're brand new, you're like, I don't know what to do. I want to play the thing that I want to play and how I want to play it. So, yeah, with us generally playing with relatively new players, the idea of putting those things of like no healing magic, like that would blow the top off a lot of players' heads that I've played with, because they're like, I don't know what to do with that.
Play healer.
Yeah,
Someone has to heal.
There's a lot in 5th edition now where it's like optimizing how your build works, because it's got, everybody knows how the basic system works. So when you mess with that, like, you know, if you even tweak quite a few, like if you like go, there's no bonus action spells, like suddenly, woof, you know, that would be, because like that would just mess with the action economy. Or if you said, if it's a bonus action spell, you can cast a spell after that, it doesn't have to be a cantrip or whatever, that suddenly gets crazy, right? Or concentrating on more than one spell. All of them are just one little rule change.
And you've yeah. Actually, what could also be a lot of fun and very interesting to play around with is, what if there was a place where that starts to happen? Like, what if the players to go to a specific place suddenly, like, I don't know, there's an asteroid has fallen from the sky, and the closer you get to it, the more you feel sort of fatigued and drained. Congratulations, long rests are now a week, short rests are now 8 hours. Sucks to suck.
Or even, having some kind of magical field around, or a natural area that makes things work like that. I know I've done a similar thing in that, like, in fact, I just kind of instituted, they're in the area where it's low magic. And so all spell durations are cut in half. Instantaneous is fine, but but like any like concentration spell, that duration's cut in half and it's harder to maintain it. And so they're struggling with, you know, it's a group of spellcasters, so they struggle with that. It's like, okay, and I make them roll for concentration every round.
See, now I really like the idea, though, of magic going too haywire, and you can't stop spells. Like, they will go to the end of their conclusion, and that's it. Like, sure, you want to stop levitating or flying or being invisible or whatever, but no, you've got to wait the hour before it's done. It's not done yet.
No, an interesting thing too would be, what if you forced, like, it's a high, like, it's like, I say, a supercharged area, any spell cast in the area, they have to cast from top to bottom from their spell slots. So as they're losing power, they can only cast lower spells. But so if you want to use that first level spell, you're using that 5th level spell slot.
I love this idea.
Yeah. Well, what if there's a world, or what if there's a region of the world where you have to roll on the wild surge table every time, and you're just a wild surge, you're just a wild sorcerer.
I might argue, though, it might be more fun to do like a 2nd edition wild surge, because don't get me wrong, the 5th edition wild surge is fine, but it feels very tame to me. Like, no one's gonna die because of a wild surge. 2nd edition wild surge, one of them is a fireball gets cast at your feet.
Yeah. No.
Your first level? Oh, and you're dead. Make a new character.
Yeah, you and everyone near you.
Oh man, some of the or like, I think there was one where like someone's lungs fill with mud, and so basically it was like some random person dies. Period.
Yeah. Magic.
Brutal.
Yeah.
And that's a great difference between, like, the wild magic with that table then becomes really dangerous, whereas 5th edition wild magic is more sort of, I think, zany and fun. I haven't looked at all honestly, I have not read all the stuff on the wild magic table because I like to be surprised by it.
I know the one that everyone points out is, I turned into a potted plant.
Number 42, you're a petunia, azaleas. It's from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Isn't that tulips?
No, it wasn't tulips. It was a small purple flower. Because it was the whale was excited about existing. The potted plant was just like, oh, not again, and then dies because it was someone else that kept dying. weird deep cuts. I've never actually read the book. I've only seen the movie, but I've talked to people who've read the book.
I've read the books, many times. Yeah. I just right there blinked it. All right, so
I think I just found my new favorite wild search. I looked at like a custom one that I found on Reddit a while ago for a magic item. I think I found my new favorite list. I'm like, oh, this is funny. I like this because I think it's the AD&D, so second edition. One of them is that music fills the air. It's just music fills the air is one of the wild.
The AD&D one is just dangerous, so I doubt because like most of them are like, and then something goes wrong and you die.
Yeah, I forget what the trigger was for AD&D second edition, but
I don't remember either.
Because I remember being in love with that and then really getting screwed over when I made that character. But yeah.
Yep.
Well, there's one where it's like, oh yeah, the caster turns 180 degrees.
Yeah, right. Like, okay, you turned around, and yeah.
It might be funny if your head turned 180 degrees.
Backwards.
That would but then it didn't turn, like you'd have to use like a greater restoration to get your head turned back or see that to me is fun, but at the same time then you're committing to a character that's just like, and then sometimes when I cast spells I now start a whole new quest. I gotta figure out how to get my head turned back right around again.
Sorry guys, it's not bad.
Yeah, that's the one thing I always want. The idea of sorcerers always seem like they should be, in general, less controllable than wizards or warlocks, because it seems it's so innate. Like maybe at high levels they learn to control it a bit more, but having that lower level where it's just like, what crazy crap's going to happen? You know, I have mood swings because I'm part dragon.
Yeah. Right.
You know, I'm going to take all this gold.
It's mine now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But.
Oh, so speaking of session zeros, genres, and all that good stuff, we're about out of time, so I need to mention that, and we've also mentioned there is an adult group. I am actually about to start a new adult group myself, and we need a couple more players. So on Thursdays, from 7 to 9, over Zoom, we're looking for new players. So if you want to send a message down to zulusdnd@gmail.com, if you're interested in participating in this, please let me know. We're probably going to be getting started here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. There was some scheduling issues and things, but yeah. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to send me a message. Send me a message. Yeah, that one. Oh, there it is. Very
right over here.
Big letters.
If Jason, do you have any openings for your adult groups right now?
You have one on Friday, don't you?
We're currently, like I said, at 3, and 5 to 6 is fine, especially with because.
Yeah, so we would love for you to be able to jump in on Thursdays. If Thursdays can't work.
Fridays, yeah.
And what time is your Friday game?
It is 7 to 9 to 9:30, depending on how crazy we get.
Yeah.
What happens?
And Alex, do you have any adult games that are open right now, or is it just Young Adventurers?
Right now, I'm mostly running Young Adventurers, and I can double check with with my group and see if they want to open it up.
Actually, sorry. Continue, please.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mentioned adult groups. Also, if you have young adventurers, so anyone between the ages of 8 and 17 who are interested in participating in the program, we have games Monday through Friday. Right now, they're usually between.
We also have Saturday and Sunday, somewhat.
Yeah.
So we run all 7 days of the week. It is getting a little bit wonky donkey though. Just as a heads up.
That will happen.
Because of summer, we're able to host a lot more we're able to host when school would normally be. So
yes.
if you want, we can form a group and just throw your kids over to us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Play D&D, please. Only D&D.
Alrighty. Next week we might be talking about complex traps, which is exciting. Unless something else catches our fancy. But is there anything else you guys wanted to say before we close out?
No, I mean, other than for me, it's just find what you want to do, and you can always just the attitude will be enough most times. If you want a silly game, you don't really need to change the rules that much. If the players
be
are silly,
silly.
it's going to end up silly.
Yeah.
If it's serious, if your players are serious, it'll end up serious. So a lot of it is attitude. Usually, at least one person's an Alex, and you end up with a silly game.
Oh, I get wacky.
Yeah.
Think of the last time that I played as a character. I wasn't the crazy one, but I did try to make friends with an otter. He bit me, and my character just lit the otter on fire.
And on that odd note, I'm going to bid all y'all adieu. Have yourself a lovely time. Stay safe out there, and we will see you next week for more D&D talk. Bye.
Bye, everyone.